The book, The Lord of the Rings, has got appendices as well, which Tolkien used to present a lot of the backstory and the origins of how he created the mythology of Middle-earth. And in a sense, our appendices are doing the same. On this first disc, you'll be able to see how Tolkien created the story and how we began our process of interpreting his book. The second disc of our appendices covers everything from when the cast got involved through the process of filming, post-production, and ultimately the release of the movie. Now, if you're like me and you don't like necessarily trying to navigate your way through DVDs, there's a button you can press called Play All, which will allow you to sit back and just watch the 2.5 hours of documentaries that we have on this disc all in just one run. And then on the second disc, if you press the Play All button, you get 3.5 hours of just documentary material straight through. But please be aware that if you do that, there's also an additional hour's worth of video material and a couple of thousand pre-production drawings, paintings, photographs accessible through the main menu. And there's also the index feature, which, like a book, is basically a list of everything on the DVD. So I really hope that you enjoy sharing our journey through the making of the Fellowship of the Ring. I've always thought it was remarkable that Tolkien basically spent his entire life creating what he called the secondary world. You know, he created the languages, he created the thousands of years of history. It's so rich and so detailed that nobody today that writes a piece of fiction is ever going to come close to the sheer wealth of information and detail. Of course, all of that makes it fiendishly difficult to adapt into any sort of movie.
Behind one of the most ambitious film projects in history is the extremely popular book, the result of the life's work of one man. John Ronald Reuel Tolkien was born on the 3rd of January 1892 in Bloemfontein, South Africa, to English parents who had emigrated there. Just a month after he didn't know.
The absence of a father would have affected him. In a way, he became the father to his younger brother. He was raised by his mother, who he was very close to.
In 1904, Mabel died from complications arising from diabetes. Tolkien was only 12.
After that, he was shuffling from one place to another with only a guardian to look after him.
There were something like 10 different houses he lived in the city. That life is quite a complicated one, quite an eventful one for a child.
His mother had been his first teacher, encouraging him to take an interest in words. Her death cemented his study of languages.
And I think in those circumstances, the school really was the refuge. It was the stable element in his life. And I also think it was a particularly good school for the likes of Tolkien. The school, I would say, was not remarkable for literary development, but it was very remarkable for producing linguists.
He formed a close bond with 3 school friends, and together they created the Tea Club of the Barovian Society, known as the TCBS, a small club based on the mutual love of heroic legends and sagas. This close friendship and shared interest in ancient languages continued throughout Tolkien's time in Oxford, where he went in 1911 to study English language and literature. But this idyllic period came to an end with the outbreak of war. Tolkien departed for France, serving as a lieutenant in the Battle of the Somme. Likewise, all of his close friends were drawn into the combat.
He had a small group of close friends, and a few years later, nearly all of them were dead, all killed in the First World War. Once again, he found himself on his own. How could it not have had a marked effect on the way he wrote and the way he thought? And people do say that the major theme of his writing is death.
During rare moments of quiet, he jotted down stories in a notebook, which he called the Book of Lost Tales.
That's where Middle-earth was born. Some of the very earliest writings of Middle-earth that Tolkien created were done in pencil on a notebook while he was in the trenches.
Tolkien's love of languages would eventually lead to him creating his own, and his lifelong pursuit of creating such language engendered the desire to create his own mythology.
He felt deeply that England lacked a mythology.
Well, England has no overriding mythology. We have a lot of folk tales, and we have borrowed a lot of other people's mythologies. The one that everybody regards as English is the story of King Arthur. But actually that's a complete mishmash from different sources, many of them French, our old enemy. So for Tolkien, the romance mythologies were a very difficult thing. He didn't feel that they should be part of English folklore or mythology at all.
He really mourned the fact that any mythology that England may have had been basically eradicated by the Norman invasion in 1066. There was this vacuum that Tolkien wanted to fill by inventing his own English mythology. Right at the end of his life, he was still working on the mythology of Middle-earth, and he died with his great sort of life work only partially complete. The Silmarillion, which was the story that he was writing in the trenches in 1917, wasn't published until after his death, and his son Christopher had to step in and do the finishing touches.
Yet during his lifetime, elements of this mythology would reach the world through his novels. Tolkien returned to Oxford in 1925 as Professor of Anglo-Saxon, but 9 years later, an unexpected and seemingly innocuous event would change the life of this Oxford Don forever.
You have a story about Tolkien inventing hobbits. There he is, you know, marking his examination papers, which is extremely boring, and he turns over and he finds a blank sheet and he writes on it, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And that's the start of the whole thing.
Paradise, we shot the Pathgallen section of it, which was the approaches to the Amon Hen seeing seat, and where there was a lot of battle between the Fellowship and the Uruk-hai.
Yeah, against that tree.
Yeah, we do have to find a good place for Boromir's little death scene with Aragorn. So yeah.
From deer to cats.
Amon Hen seeing seat we did alongside Lake Wakatipu, which is sort of closer to Queenstown, on a beautiful little promontory above the lake.